Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we have been taking a look at 10 hidden gems for every letter of the alphabet that you may have missed on the PlayStation 1. This time round we're looking at the letter Y, which, I'll be honest, is a pretty crappy letter. But hey, we gotta do it. Also, I couldn't actually find 10 games that started with Y, which I was kind of surprised about. So I have had to cheat on a couple of them and just include games that have a Y in there. So I apologise in advance for the quality of this video, for many reasons really. If it was an option, I would have just skipped this letter, but that would have been worse if you asked me. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. We are starting with Yeh Yeh Tennis from Sunsoft, which back in the NES days would almost guarantee you'd be getting a good game, but sadly they did have a bit of a decline. Anyway, this is a tennis game, and a pretty basic one at that. You're given a few options. You can do single match, circuit or practice. Then you have quite a few characters to choose from, who each have their own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to speed, power, technique, and their preference on playing up close to the net or nearer to the back. So you choose your character, and then from a selection of courts, again each of which affects the play in different ways, some offering more speed and bounce, and then others are not so much. And then of course you play tennis, but not very well. Each of the buttons on the controller is a different type of hit, though only two of them seem to be any different from one another. You've got a regular hit, and then pressing triangle does a lob. Now I'm sure there is probably a slight difference in the other ones, but I really couldn't notice it. You can direct your hit by holding a direction, as well as holding up or down to send the ball closer to or further from the net. Basically, you want to try and put the ball where your opponent isn't. But this is much easier said than done, thanks to the unresponsive controls, a very short reach, and the fact that the ball often just goes straight through your character. Your timing here has to be perfect, or you're just going to be swinging wildly at the air and not hitting anything. Even serving is a lot harder than it needs to be, and I found I'd always get at least one fault. Even after practicing, I could still never get the timing right just for regular hits or serves. The circuit mode has a couple of interesting mechanics, and you get to distribute some ability points so you can adjust your character to your playstyle, but the computer AI, even on the lower difficulties, rarely seems to mess up, making it incredibly hard to score a single point, or 15 points I suppose as it is. The graphics here are fine, the game has the fun chibi style to everything, and the animations etc. are decent enough, but this does mean that you have stubby arms and your reach is just not very good, but at least there is a variety in courts and players though, eh? This can be played with up to 4 players in a game of doubles, but the fact that it isn't just very fun to play, and it fails with some things that are fundamental for a tennis game, means it really isn't one I'd recommend. Play Super Tennis on the SNES instead. Okay, disclaimer here, Yuusha-Oh is not something I've ever had any interest in. I don't really like these card battling games in real life or in video game worlds, so you really have to take everything I say here with a pinch of salt, a large pinch, or you could just ignore it completely, which is probably recommended. Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories presumably follows the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! And his mates, and at the start of the game you see some evil git getting his hands on some magic power thing. The game then switches control and lets you have a look at a few places on a small map, where you'll be buying and collecting cards, putting together your deck, progressing the story, and of course having exciting card battles, though the exciting bit isn't that true. Once you've spoken to all the characters around you, you'll eventually get asked to have a battle. Here you're taken to a 3D board arena thing where you can choose your cards to battle against your opponent. You can have up to 40 in your deck at a time, and they all have all sorts of different stats. You have power and defense, as well as a type like earth, fairy, flying or that sort of thing. Then you have cards that just give you stat boosts, and other ones that will power them up. You can also have magic cards which can affect the whole playfield, and if you're not careful you can even mess yourself up by using these. On each turn you have 5 cards to choose from, and you have to choose one of those 5. If you have more than that on the board already, you have to either replace one of the cards you already have out, or if you're lucky you'll get a card that can merge with one you already have, making it even more powerful. This makes choosing what cards you use quite tactical, as you don't want to always have the best ones in your hand out there, as you might be forced to replace them with weaker cards later down the line. You take it in turns with your opponent to place a card, and you can choose to put them face down so it's a surprise when you're attacked, or if it's a card you want to scare them with you can put it face up so they know not to mess with you, though I don't really see why you do this as it just makes them easier to counter. cards placed face down remain a mystery until they're used to attack or attacked by an enemy. But I still don't really know how to win a battle. I fought someone and absolutely kicked their ass, defeating all of their cards, but I still lost the battle. I'm guessing I've got to do something else with getting them across the board or something, but I didn't really care enough to check. Also, when you put a card down, you get to choose a planet name to go along with it. I've got no idea why, but I'm sure it's exciting. There's no battle animation as such, you just compare the two cards and the weakest one bursts into flames. The magic cards have a little animation, but that's about as exciting as it gets. I do really like most of the artwork on the cards though. It is really cool, and I'd actually like to see some of the characters as playable ones in their own games instead of a boring card game. Between battles, you just look at still images and read the waffle that the other characters are saying. It was never very interesting. So yeah, as I said, I really don't care for this sort of thing. So for me, this was a load of boring old rubbish. However, if you're a Yu-Gi-Oh fan, then you might be looking at this and think it looks awesome, and you're likely screaming at me for not understanding it. And you know what? I don't care. If you're into this, then I'm sure it's alright, but if you're not, here is probably not the best place to start, as there isn't even a tutorial. So yeah, I'll leave this one for you to decide. Yay, another Yu-Gi-Oh game. This one is called Monster Capsule Breed and Battle, and I actually think I would have enjoyed this one if I knew what the hell was happening. It is a Japan only game, you see, and in fact there's a lot of those in this video, so if you're a racist you might not want to hang around. Anyway, here you have to breed and grow your own monsters, and then of course battle them. You can grow up to 6 monsters at a time, choosing the terrain and the eggs that they're incubated in, as well as the scenery. Once you've set up their landscape, your egg appears, of which you have a choice of colours. Depending on the combination of everything you use, you'll hatch a different monster, which you can then feed and train to make it all tough and that. When your monsters are ready, you can use them in a turn-based strategy game where you'll fight other monsters and get access to new ones. In these parts, you're in a square board, and you can move around and attack. All your attacks and movement speed are dependent on how well you've raised your monsters, or if you can't be asked, you can use some of the default monsters, but they're pretty damn weak. You take it in turns with your opponents to move your monsters around the board and attack one another, the goal being to destroy the egg of your opponent or just kill all their monsters before they get to yours. It's kind of like chess thing with monsters moving differently. Some can only go forward or back, some only diagonally, and some can only jump to every other square and so on. So you'll need to learn the strategies for the monsters you raise. Of course, the big issue with the game for me is that it's all in Japanese, so I didn't have a clue what anything meant. For the most part, you could figure out the menus, and most of the time I had the option to cancel my previous action, so was able to use a lot of trial and error. But making strong monsters was tough, because I didn't know what the things I was doing to them was actually doing to them in terms of making their stats better. The graphics are all 2D sprites and they look fine, but nothing you haven't seen before, and not really anything better than the 16-bit consoles. However, the gameplay is actually pretty good, and believe it or not, I do enjoy games like this, and actually making these monsters was kind of fun. I just wish I could have understood some of it. Now, if you're ready for me to butcher some Japanese, here is Yuuyami Doori Tankentai, which, according to Google, means something along the crow's curse. This is one of those games that's quite difficult to get anywhere in if you don't read Japanese, which is a real shame as I love the style and theme of this one. It's a survival horror, and you play as a bunch of punk school kids who are walking their awesome dog but happen across a crow. Then the screen went all weird and some text popped up that I couldn't read, but I got the feeling it wasn't good. The next thing I knew, I was choosing from one of the 3 characters in their high school, but didn't have a clue what I was meant to do, and it was disappointing. You control your chosen character and walk around some pretty large areas all on a 2D plane. As you do this, you'll find things to interact with or collect, and of course there's a ton of characters everywhere for you to talk to, though I never knew what they were saying. I presume a lot of it was just general bants, but some of it was probably just clues or telling me what I needed to do, which would have been handy. As it's a 2D plane, getting around the environment could actually be kind of tricky, as it'll often change perspective and it was hard to know which direction I was going at times. Even getting around the school at the start of the game was tricky, but manageable. I do really like the graphics here. They're sort of digitised but then drawn over it from the looks of things, and it means the game has some really cool animations, and the game is a bit of a survival horror like I said, and at times it did have a bit of a spooky vibe to it. The controls can be quite stiff and unresponsive thanks to the animations. This is a game though that you have to play kind of slowly and take your time with it, otherwise it will just feel like you aren't doing anything when you press buttons. You do have to move at the game's pace, not your own. But sadly, as it was all very text heavy, I couldn't really get anywhere, but I really would have liked to, so if there's a translation around, please do let me know. There are playthroughs on YouTube I could watch, but I don't really want to spoil it for myself, and I'm holding out and hoping this one does get a translation. If you can read Japanese, I would recommend giving this one a go. Let's have something us stupid Westerners can understand, but barely. Here is You Don't Know Jack. Now, if you're cool like me, you're familiar with the Jackbox games, and this is where it all started. You Don't Know Jack is a quiz game for up to 3 players, which is a stupid number of players, but hey, we move on. There is only one game mode here, which is a crazy quiz that features thousands of irreverent questions on wacky topics that are deliberately worded strangely and are likely things that none of us would really know. To play the game is simple. You and your friends grab a controller. The question is then read out, and if you know the answer, you can buzz in to have your guess. If you get it right, you win fake money. Get it wrong and you lose that amount of money. Simple. You always have a choice of 4 answers and you can choose the topic before the question is asked. As well as regular questions, you have other types of things to answer, like word association. So a word will be on the screen and then other words will flash up on the screen for a second or two. If it's something that relates to that main word, you hit your buzzer to get points. It's all very simple, and played with friends, it's a lot of fun. It only lasts a short while, so you'll likely find yourself playing a few rounds of an evening. I actually used to play this game quite a lot in college with some friends, and we had a blast. You can play it on your own, but there's really no point. Playing it again for this video, I did still have fun with it, but it does start to show a few issues, which might just be me being older and more grumpy. Firstly, I really can't stand the commentator. He's not funny or wacky, he is just annoying, which is something that applies to all the modern Jackbox games too. None of the talking is skippable, so you'll hear the same shit jokes between rounds quite often. Also, and something that's common with any quiz game really, is that the developers forgot that the rest of the world exists, so most of the questions are America based. Now, to be fair, it's unlikely that most people will know the answers to any of the questions here, but being one of the 12 people that does live outside the US, it would have been nice to have seen fewer of these. I mean, it might be that I was just unlucky and got given a few particularly America-heavy rounds, but who knows. Something you can do when playing against others is screw them over. You can press your screw button, and this lets you force another player to answering a question and inevitably losing points. This is a great way to keep things even. You can only use it once per game though. And that's all there is to it really, it's a quiz game. There's nothing else to do here, but it can be good fun with a few friends and would be a perfect drinking game. Give this one a try, next time it's party night.
Let's see what happened. You're the best and not the worst, but let's see how your overall score looks. Well, it seems we're moving on now. Let's see what's...
If you want more quizzes, then You Don't Know Jack 2 is for you. It's basically the same game, but has had a slight facelift with better user interface. There's thousands of more questions here, all based on wacky topics with answers that it's unlikely you'll know. Interestingly, some things seem to have been removed here. You don't have the option to choose the category you want to answer anymore, which is a bit of a shame, and there seem to be fewer question types, with it basically just being multiple choice and not much else. There's not really any point in me saying anything else here. Everything I said about the first one pretty much applies here. It's fun with a couple of mates, but not something you'll play on your own. Again, if you like silly quizzes, you'll get a bit of enjoyment out of this one.
Category's gonna be, if I could turn back time, I'd still be an old coot. You get it right, I'm putting you up $2,000. Here.
Time for some more language butchering now. Here is Yuugen Gaisha Chikyuu, another very Japanese game, and one that is pretty much impenetrable if you don't speak the language. From what I can gather, you are part of an army squad who have to command a number of vehicles and mechs, and the game plays out like a cross between a visual novel, a dating sim, and a strategy game. You have to wade through a huge amount of unskippable story and text here. Now, presumably if you can understand it, this isn't a problem. You meet loads of characters and they all have way too much to say. After what felt like hours, I was given a few menus where I fumbled my way around. Here you get to choose from some of the characters you've met and been introduced to, and from what I can tell you've got different training options for them which affect their stats. I don't know exactly what I did, but I'm sure it's something that would come in handy for the next part of the game, which is the turn-based strategy side of things. In these parts you take control of a few different units, and your job is to blow up enemies, escort units, and do generally things that good guys do against bad guys. These all play out in a turn-based fashion, so you choose your units you want to move and you position them in the best places to attack, and so on. Again, I had a bit of trouble navigating the menus, but it didn't take too long before I was able to remember where I needed to go to select or move or attack or anything like that. And generally, I do actually like these sorts of games, so I didn't mind doing it. It's just a shame that it took so long to actually get there. There was nearly 30 minutes of people talking before I got to play this part of the game, which isn't really something that appeals to me. And of course, after this you also have a lot of drawn out dialogue. But again, I do have to stress this isn't really a bad thing, it's just that when you can't understand it, it becomes quite tedious. So yeah, that's all I can really tell you about this one. I don't think this is a bad game, it's just not an accessible one. But do give it a go if you can read the language and like playing with tacticals. And now for the last game I could find that started with a Y, and it's another Japanese one. Here is Yuusha-Oh GaoGaiGar. Stupid name. It's another game that is mostly reading, but with some mini-games thrown in for good measure. The story, as far as I can tell, is that you're part of a crew that works at a cool water park that definitely doesn't mistreat its animals. There's a million years worth of talking here, where it looks like some of the parts of the park are just looking a bit miserable, and there's even an evil monster looking thing that seems to be just watching you and laughing creepily. Then all of a sudden there were video clips showing Power Ranger style mechs and super people. I really have no idea what was going on, but I kind of wish I do now, you know. After a while I was suddenly riding on the back of a killer whale and jumping through hoops. This part was kind of fun, but then it was back to more talking. The Japanese sure do like their reading, just shows how stupid and impatient us Westerners are. Thankfully, you can skip most of the dialogue here, though it was kind of interesting to see all the weird stuff that was going on. But there's mini-games thrown into the mix, which are actually quite fun and unique to play. The controls for these are decent enough, though the instructions are all in Japanese, so I was never totally sure what I was meant to be doing, but through a bit of trial and error, I did soon sort it out and was able to beat a couple of them. Again, I can't really give a proper opinion on this one, but it was kind of fun. It looks decent, and the mini-games I got to try were fine, though I can't really see this being a game that many people will care about or ever want to play. Right, let's have something we can all understand. Here is RayCrisis, which some of you more intelligent viewers might notice doesn't start with a Y, but it does have one in it, and we need 10 games. RayCrisis is a vertical shooter where you are of course a future spaceship thingy that has to take on an evil supercomputer and is causing all sorts of problems. There is more to the story about cloning and viruses, but all you really need to know is that you move up the screen and shoot anything that moves. What's cool is that you get to choose from a few different levels, and which order you want to play them in, and there's also a few different ships to play in as well, each of which have their own weapons. Each ship has a standard laser which generally fires pretty fast and is good for dealing with most regular enemies. Then you've got a lock-on attack which has a shorter range but tends to be more powerful and of course has the added bonus of locking onto enemies. And then there's the screen clearing blast which you can use once you've built up a bar at the bottom of the screen. You don't get many of these per level, so make sure to use it when you're in real need. The gameplay itself is your standard shooter fare, but it's pretty well done. You get loads of deadly enemies on the screen and eventually you'll come to a massive boss that needs a good kicking. These bosses are generally tough and you'll die a lot at first while trying to figure out their patterns and how their attacks work. Controlling your ships is great and very responsive, and most of the weapons are good to use. There aren't any new ones, but you do get power-ups for the ones that you have to make them stronger or fire more bullets. You do have to be very careful as you can only take one hit before dying, but most of the enemies will take a handful. Thankfully your hitbox is pretty generous, so you can get pretty close to the bullets and not have to worry about cheap deaths. I really like the graphics here too. The robot enemies aren't really anything you haven't seen in a million other games like this, but they still look cool and blow up nicely, and the amount of bullets and lasers all over the place is funky and colourful, which is always nice. Overall, this is a pretty standard shooter, but it's well made and a lot of fun. You'll be able to beat it in less than an hour thanks to the unlimited continues, but it's got a nice bit of replay value with choosing your routes and a handful of ships on offer. Worth a look if you're into shooters. And finally for today, in what is a much shorter video than usual, here is Magical Drop 3, Yokuba, which also has a Y in it. This is a cute, challenging puzzle game where you have a ton of different game modes, characters and scenarios to choose from. There really is a lot in here. But no matter which one you choose, the gameplay is largely the same. Basically, you have to grab the coloured balls that are coming down from the top of the screen, and then you have to place them on balls of the same colour to get rid of them. How many you need at any one time to make them disappear and the layout in which they need to be in all varies depending on the level and scenario you're on. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3, or sometimes you need loads. Oh, and beware, I probably will be saying balls a lot here. Now, this might seem the same as a puzzle bubble game, but it's actually quite different in the way it plays. How it works here is that you choose your character, and then you control a little jester at the bottom of the screen. The jester person can grab balls from the board above, and can actually carry as many of the same colour as you want. But you have to be careful when you're doing this, as you don't want to grab all of the ones of the same colour, as you need to throw them back to another one of the same colour in order for them to disappear. This adds a lot of strategy when it comes to making combos, which of course is what you really want to do. Doing this makes your opponent's balls drop faster. And of course, the first one to get their balls in the bottom first is the loser. Or maybe they're the winner, depends what you're into, I suppose. But you don't always battle against people. Sometimes you have a single screen and your goal is just to clear all the balls to progress. Or there's puzzle levels where you only have a certain number of moves to clear all the balls, so you really have to plan your moves. There is a surprising amount in here. There's also a story mode, which is all in Japanese, but that's alright, as it's basically just an excuse to battle the cute anime women. Then there's a board game mode where you roll a dice to move around a board, and you get various games depending on the spaces you land on. It's all very exciting. Which sounded sarcastic, but I genuinely had a lot of fun with this game, and I couldn't stop playing it after I got used to how it all worked. Now, it's not easy, a lot of the computer opponents are very unforgiving, and I got absolutely owned my first few games, which was sad. But I got over it, and I learnt to make combos, and then I started winning, and I had a great time with this one. Graphics are all 2D sprites, and they are what you expect from a game like this. They're nothing special, but they're not bad. In fact, I do kinda like the style. There's a few cutscenes which are all just still images, but it does look decent enough. Of course, the controls are simple, but they are great and incredibly responsive, so when you know what you're doing, you'll likely be hooked like I was. Overall, this is just a fun puzzle game that has a ton of content, some really fun gameplay, and is a game I would actually recommend if you like this sort of thing. So there you go, 10 hidden gems for the PlayStation 1 starting with the letter Y. Alright, let's face it, almost all of these games are pretty crap, but there's a few that aren't bad, and we had to use any that started with the letter Y. But yeah, as always, let us know in the comments below which games are your favourite, and tell me if I missed any good ones, because I hope I kinda did, because they can't all be this bad. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.